Welcome back to Badger Radio on AM 950. We got a little hootenanny going on around here today. And you might wonder about how do we select the topics and the guests? How do we have an advice columnist like Carla Barnhill? How do we end up talking about the ridiculous things that we do in the crowds? Come on, you got to be kidding me. We talk about the serious things with politics and some of the travels with the presidential primary and soon to be the Republican candidate for presidency of the United States. And you think, where does all this come from? How does this little hootenanny get put together? Well, sometimes we're out cruising the cultural and religious edges to find our guests. And sometimes people are good enough to pay attention to us and to offer up their perspective. And my friend Dean Seal contacted me this last week on Facebook. And Dean is an adjunct instructor over at Augsburg College and also works with Spirit in the House, which is an effort to put on live theater. And he sent me this message and said, "Hey, Doug, I'm producing a show about Dracula that's about forgiveness. Can we talk about it on your radio show sometime?" And I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah. If you're doing Dracula and forgiveness, I mean, that's radio gold right there. That's Marconi award-winning kind of material. Hey, Dean, thanks for the offer and for being on the show this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Dracula and forgiveness. What is this show that you're working on about Dracula and forgiveness?
There's a show that we're producing in the fall. It's and that's called Marietta. And let me digress a little bit here, and then I'll come back to Dracula.
Please. We love a good digression.
Good. Marietta is a play we've been working on for a couple of years. It's based on a true story, and the author is a guy named Stephen O'Toole. He interviewed a woman whose daughter was kidnapped, and this woman worked through her anger and got to the point where she forgave the kidnappers before she even knew what was going to happen to her daughter.
Wow.
And then her daughter was murdered.
Oh.
And she basically settled on, she helped figure out who did it and got him to confess.
Wow.
And then the guy hung himself in jail.
Oh, my goodness.
And she is now an advocate against capital punishment.
Wow.
Because she said, I don't want anybody to die in the name of my daughter.
Even her daughter, yeah.
Yeah. So we've done a couple of readings of this. We're going to mount a production of it in November at Concordia University. I'm a little dangerous luck action here. I'm talking about it before we sign the contract, but it looks like everything's going to happen.
Well, let's plan on it. Good.
Just going to go out on a limb here, and we wanted to. Spirit in the House produces shows about ethics, about spirituality, stuff that deals with how do we live with spirituality in our lives, and how do we understand other people's spirituality, so that, the idea that there's this thing called spiritual diversity, many paths up the mountain, or as the Hindus say, truth goes by many names.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is, how do we engage people through theater, through storytelling, and through film? How do we deal with spiritual issues that make people think about bringing ethics into their lives and understanding that other people are going to have other approaches? How do we talk about this stuff without poking each other's eyes out?
Very good.
So there's a storyteller named Megan Wells. She's from Chicago. I've seen her do a couple of things. Lauren Nemi is a producer and a storyteller here in town. He's got a thing called Two Chairs Telling, where he will pair storytellers with each other. And he's brought her up a couple of times. And I've seen her do an Oscar Wilde story about a fisherman who falls in love with a mermaid, and she says, you have to get rid of your soul. We don't have souls down here.
Yeah.
And really scary and amazing story. And then she also did one about Mary Magdalene. And it's about Mary Magdalene describing the last night, the Last Supper, where Jesus institutes the communion service. But it's also told with a little bit of heretical material from the books about Mary Magdalene that were not allowed in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So she's very scholarly, she's very literate, and she's an amazing performer. And I just said, whatever I'm doing this year, I want to try to include her in it.
I see.
So I called her up and I said, what do you got about forgiveness? And she said, well, there's Dracula. There's Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I immediately thought, I haven't read what she's talking about. I have no idea what she's talking about.
That's what I thought when you sent me your thing. I'm like, well, I trust Dean, and I'm wondering what's the connection between Dracula and forgiveness?
Yeah, what's that about?
What's that about?
We talked about it, and what she's focusing on is there's a character named Mina Harker. And Mina is the second female victim of Dracula. Dracula, when he's in his full power, can turn into mist and go through under doors and then formulate his body so that it comes back, and then he can suck the life out of somebody. And it takes him, 2 or 3 nights to get it to the point where that person turns into a vampire. And first, Mina's best friend goes under, and then she starts to go under. And she is misportrayed in movies. They don't stick to this. They don't stick to Bram Stoker's idea, where she falls in love with Dracula, or she's a helpless victim, or whatever. But as she's fading, and the guys around her are trying to save her life, and she says, "Don't go after Dracula with hate, because if I go under as a vampire, the only way you can liberate my soul, you're going to have to drive a stake through my heart. You're going to have to cut off my head, but you can't do that with hate because it will be an act of love to save me. So it will still be an act of love to do that to Dracula too." And the guys don't really understand that until they trap Dracula, who's trying to get back to his castle. He's in a box that's being driven by gypsies up this road, and they have to stop him before the sun goes down. And so they do, and they drive a stake through his heart, and they cut his head off. And she's the one who describes this in the book. She says, there was such a look of peace on his face that would never have been imagined by any of us. So the idea that Dracula is trapped in being this, in this infernal, eternal life of sucking the life out of people, and they actually free him from it. And the way Megan puts it is that she says, Mina understands that all of us are just one bite away from vampire hunger.
Wow. Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. We had a fellow on the show a couple of months ago who wrote a book about trying to talk about the role of monsters and heroes and so on in our culture. And his suggestion is that the reason these monster narratives exist is because they're really commentary, not about fanciful supernatural things, but it's a way to have us address issues that affect us as humanity.
Right.
So they're real lived narratives that give us a chance to have maybe a more exaggerated view encapsulated inside of a story. And it sounds like that's what's going on here, that the story of Dracula, because I've never heard this. I got to tell you, I don't know my Dracula story as well, but I'd never heard the idea that Dracula story is one where the choice is forgiveness and love over violence and destruction. And violence and destruction will just produce more violence and destruction. And if I'm hearing you right, and forgiveness and love will produce freedom. It's
actually right? It's a yes, and it's violence as an act of love.
Wow.
And in this instance, where you're dealing with a supernatural creature who's trapped in this cycle of the evil of sucking the life out of other people in order to stay alive, and he's as trapped in that as anybody is trapped in a cycle of evil.
Wow.
So, and your buddy was talking about something that somebody else talked. We were talking about Dracula, and he said, "Well, you remember the Frankenstein story, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't the creature who was the monster; it was the villagers."
Yes.
So it's the creature that people don't understand that brings out the monster in people. When you're talking about the Frankenstein story.
Yeah. So how do you stage something like this? Is this going to be at your theater? Is this going to be a 1 week long show? How does this? How will this play out in the fall?
It's the Marietta play is in the fall. Mm-hmm. Dracula is going to be Good Friday and Bad Saturday
of next year. A year from now.
No. This weekend.
Oh, this weekend?
No, not this weekend.
Week from
Easter
Friday.
weekend, which is a week from Friday.
Oh my goodness! Well,
that's April 5th and 6th.
Okay.
There's a 6th and 7th.
I see. April 5 and 6. And where is this taking place?
April 6th and 7th.
April 6th and 7. Okay, April 6th and 7.
At the Black Forest, which is the German restaurant on 26th and Nicollet in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And they have a banquet hall called the Festal Room. And Cheap Theater has been doing storytelling there for about 10 years. And that's run by Erica Christ. And they have Cheap Theater does a monthly storytelling show there. So it's really pretty perfect for that. You don't need microphones. You just set up in this beautifully painted room, set up in all this traditional German decor.
Sure, perfect.
You can go across.
That's a little haunting in its own right to some of us.
Oh, it's a great atmosphere for something like Dracula.
And if people are going to look for internet details about this on websites, where should they look?
Well, there's the Spirit in the House blog page, which we use as a website, and that's spiritinthehouse.org.
Okay.
You can also go to ticketworks.com to order tickets in advance.
All right. And how long is the show? If they're going to come and they're going to have their evening there, what should they expect?
Close to 2 hours.
Wow.
It's got an intermission. It's a full-fledged production. She's worked on it for 3 years. She says she can nail about a half an hour a year.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and she's done this in festivals around in Wisconsin and stuff like that. So it's she's I got to tell you, she's an amazing performer. She's fully dives into the characters. It's really more of a piece of theater with just one person doing it. But I'll put her up in the ranks with Kevin Kling and Jim Stoll in terms of the best storytellers I've ever seen. She's a phenom.
And her name is Megan Wells, and I'm going to put a link to this to the website on the Doug Pagitt radio page.
Yeah, and if you want to know more about her, you can go to meganwells.com.
Okay.
And see the kind of stuff she does. She's part of a festival for Ray Bradbury in Wisconsin that she does every year. She's actually coming into town to do her Mary Magdalene thing at this church I work at in Burnsville. She's going to do that on Maundy Thursday. So she's going to do a half-hour Mary Magdalene on Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday she turns into the Dracula story.
So it's embodied storytelling. That's Dean Seal. There's a link to his website over at the Doug Pagitt radio page on Facebook, and we'll also put it in our link for on the archive page of DougPagittRadio.com. Dean, thanks for letting us know about this. And I'm going to be in Guatemala, unfortunately, or I would be there myself. So hopefully some people will be there in my stead. Maybe we can send the sidekick over to give us a report back on it.
Send one of your minions.
Yes, we'll send many of the minions. Hey, okay. Dean, thanks so much. Stick with us here for the Right On Doug Pagitt Radio on AM 950 and DougPagittRadio.com.
We've been traveling